"I'd rather have no mother than you," my stepdaughter yelled. Then I found her birth mom's secret that changed everything forever. I first met Hannah when she was 12, a quiet girl who spent more time with books than people. Rachel had been raising her alone since Hannah was 5, when Linda's addiction finally spiraled beyond control. I still remember the case files from my days as a social worker. Linda choosing drugs over court-mandated rehab, missing visitations, eventually surrendering her parental rights in exchange for a lighter sentence. Rachel was different. She worked 2 jobs to keep Hannah in their small apartment, never missing a parent-teacher conference or doctor's appointment. When I met them at a domestic violence support group, Rachel there as a volunteer, me presenting a workshop, I saw the fierce love between them, a bond forged in hardship but unbreakable. Or so I thought. Our relationship grew slowly, carefully. I knew the statistics about blended families, about the challenges of step-parenting. I'd counseled enough broken families to understand the delicate balance required. For 2 years, I was just Mom's friend Sarah, joining them for movie nights and helping Hannah with math homework. The day Hannah first called me Mom was entirely unexpected. We were at the beach, Rachel laid up at home with the flu. Hannah had just conquered her fear of deep water, swimming out past the breakers with me beside her. As we walked back to our towels, she grabbed my hand and said, "Thanks, Mom." Just like that, as natural as breathing. I cried that night after dropping her home, overwhelmed by the trust implicit in that single word. Rachel and I married 6 months later, Hannah serving as both bridesmaid and ring bearer, insisting on doing both. Our little family felt complete, whole in a way I'd never imagined possible. The first signs of trouble came subtly. Linda had always been allowed to send letters from prison, part of her rehabilitation program, but they were supposed to go through proper channels. When I found one tucked into Hannah's algebra textbook, postmarked from a different state, I should have recognized the warning signs. Linda had always been clever. Before drugs took everything, she'd been a successful real estate agent, known for her ability to read people and tell them exactly what they wanted to hear. Even addiction couldn't dull that talent. It just redirected it toward manipulation and fraud. Looking back, I can see how perfectly she played us all. The letters to Hannah were masterpieces of emotional manipulation, each one carefully crafted to exploit teenage insecurities and natural curiosity about biological connections. To Rachel, she presented herself as a reformed woman who only wanted supervised visits, playing on Rachel's own childhood trauma of losing her mother young. But I knew Linda's other side. I'd been the one to document the series of scams she ran before her arrest, targeting vulnerable single mothers with promises of investment opportunities, draining their savings with stories about sick children or urgent medical needs. Each victim withdrawn from domestic violence or addiction, each desperate enough to believe in miracles. What I never told Hannah or Rachel was that I'd been the one to finally build the case that sent Linda to prison. My testimony, backed by months of detailed documentation, had sealed her fate. I convinced myself it wasn't relevant anymore, that 12 years was enough time for someone to change. That decision haunts me now. The facade began cracking the day Hannah turned 17. Linda's letters had grown more frequent, more demanding. She'd started sending old family photos, carefully curated snapshots of happier times before the addiction. Hannah became obsessed with these glimpses of her real family, spending hours studying faces and locations, searching for pieces of herself in these frozen moments. Rachel found me in our home office one night, surrounded by old case files. "She's different now," Rachel insisted, showing me Linda's recent letters. "She's been sober for 12 years. She's taken every rehabilitation program the prison offers." Maybe. I couldn't find the words to explain what I saw in those letters. The same patterns, the same manipulative phrases I documented years ago. How do you tell your wife that her hope for healing might be the very thing destroying your family? Then came the photos. Every family picture that included me, systematically removed from our walls. The spaces left behind felt like wounds, visible reminders of my gradual erasure from their lives. Hannah claimed she was redecorating, but I recognized Linda's influence. The same tactics she'd used on other families, creating literal and emotional voids only she could fill. The betrayal cut deepest when I discovered Rachel's secret emails. My wife, my partner in building this family, had been corresponding with Linda for weeks. The messages started innocently enough, updates about Hannah, cautious questions about Linda's rehabilitation. But they evolved into something more sinister, with Linda subtly threatening legal action while promising family harmony if Rachel helped ease the transition. She says she has evidence that her original surrender of rights was coerced, Rachel confessed, her voice small and afraid. She's threatening to contest the adoption, to expose how the system failed her. I thought if I played along, kept her calm, I knew then that Linda hadn't changed at all. She'd just gotten better at hiding her true nature, using her time in prison to refine her manipulation techniques. The family restoration counseling business, she was promoting was just her latest con, targeting desperate families with promises of healing while bleeding them dry. But knowing the truth and proving it were different challenges. Linda had learned from her previous mistakes, keeping her financial transactions obscured through a network of former inmates and their families. Each victim was connected to another, creating a web of dependency and shared guilt that made them reluctant to come forward. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Emma, my sister and a financial advisor, recognized Linda's name from a client consultation. The client, another mother recently reunited with her reformed, addict daughter, had been pressured to invest her retirement savings in Linda's counseling business. Together, Emma and I started mapping the connections. Each thread led to another victim, another family torn apart by Linda's promises of redemption. The pattern was always the same: emotional manipulation leading to financial exploitation, with children used as both bait and leverage. The sting operation took 3 months to organize. 3 months of watching my family slip further away while gathering evidence. 3 months of sleeping in Emma's guest room, crying myself to sleep while plotting Linda's downfall. But when Linda walked into that fake investor meeting, the look of shock on her face made every painful moment worth it. The aftermath wasn't what I expected. Hannah, confronted with undeniable evidence of her birth mother's deception, didn't just break down. She got angry. The kind of anger that fuels change rather than destruction. She started reaching out to other victims, collecting their stories, building a support network that would eventually become her life's work. Rachel's healing was quieter, but no less profound. In therapy, she finally confronted her own fears about motherhood, about abandonment, about the desperate need to keep peace at any cost. I thought I was protecting our family, she admitted. Instead, I almost lost the best parts of it. Today, our walls tell a different story. The empty spaces are filled not just with returned photos, but with new ones. Hannah at her high school graduation, all 3 of us crying happy tears. Family vacations where we learned to trust each other again. Simple moments of connection over Saturday morning pancakes. Linda serves her sentence, her appeals denied by judges who've seen the full scope of her deception. The letters still come, but they go straight to the shredder now. Hannah says she keeps one, unopened, as a reminder that sometimes the hardest person to forgive isn't the one who hurt you, but yourself for wanting to believe the lie. I've learned that family isn't just about who stays when things get tough. It's about who comes back when they realize they've lost their way. It's about choosing each other, every day, even when that choice isn't easy. Hannah puts it best. Some people spend their whole lives searching for the perfect family. We had to break apart to realize we already were one. Not perfect, but real. And real love. The kind that survives betrayal and rebuilds from ashes. That's better than perfect any day. Some nights, I still wake up wondering if I could have prevented it all by telling them the truth about Linda sooner. But then I look at who we've become. Stronger, wiser, more compassionate. And I realize that sometimes wounds have to break open to truly heal. The pancake tradition continues, but it means something different now. Each Saturday morning, as the smell of butter and maple syrup fills our kitchen, we're not just making breakfast. We're choosing each other, again and again. Building a family not from blood or law or obligation, but from love that's been tested, broken, and made stronger in the healing. And that, more than any legal document or biological connection, is what makes us real. What I didn't expect was how the aftermath of Linda's arrest would ripple through other families. One morning, a month after the sting operation, Hannah came running downstairs with her laptop. "Mom, you need to see this." Her screen displayed a social media group with over 300 members, all children of parents who'd been involved in Linda's schemes. Some were victims, others unwitting accomplices. Each story echoed with familiar patterns: manipulation, false promises, shattered trust. But it was one particular post that caught my attention. A girl named Mia, 16, wrote about finding adoption papers in her mother's desk. Papers that proved Linda was her birth mother too. Hannah's hands shook as she read the post aloud. She didn't just scam families, she whispered. She had other children. She gave them up, then tried to use them in her cons too. The investigation revealed 3 more siblings scattered across different states. Each adoption shrouded in lies. Each child a potential pawn in Linda's elaborate schemes. The discovery hit Hannah hard, forcing her to confront the reality that even her earliest memories with Linda might have been part of a longer con. Rachel threw herself into helping track down the other children, perhaps trying to atone for her own brief alliance with Linda. Her real estate connections proved invaluable as we worked with social services to locate each sibling. The first meeting was at our house. Mia arrived with her adoptive parents, looking so much like Hannah that it took my breath away. They sat across from each other at our kitchen table, 2 sisters separated by Linda's choices, united by their determination to break her patterns. "Did she send you letters too?" Mia asked, pulling out a familiar-looking envelope. Hannah nodded, retrieving her own collection. As they compared notes, the similarities were striking. The same promises, the same manipulative phrases, even the same childhood photos, though in Mia's versions, Hannah had been carefully cropped out. The discovery of Linda's other children changed everything. Hannah's anger transformed into something more complex, a mix of grief for the siblings she never knew and determination to prevent Linda from hurting anyone else. Emma suggested turning our support network into something formal. With her financial expertise, my social work background, and Hannah's first-hand experience, we created the Breaking Patterns Project, a nonprofit dedicated to helping families recognize and escape manipulation tactics like Linda's. Rachel's involvement surprised us all. The guilt over her temporary betrayal fueled a fierce dedication to helping other parents avoid similar traps. She became our housing coordinator, helping relocated families find safe places to rebuild their lives. The most unexpected development came during one of our workshop sessions. A woman approached me afterward, her hands clutching a familiar prison letter. "I was Linda's cellmate," she said. "I helped her mail some of those letters, but I didn't know. I didn't understand what she was doing." Her testimony opened new doors in the investigation, revealing the full scope of Linda's prison-based operations. Other inmates had been recruited to help, their own families often becoming unwitting participants in the scheme. Linda's response to the growing investigation was predictable: more manipulation. She sent letters to judges, claiming she was being framed by a vindictive ex-social worker. She tried to contact her other children, using the same emotional triggers that had once worked on Hannah. But this time, no one was listening. The hardest moment came when we had to tell Mia's 12-year-old sister Grace about her true parentage. Her adoptive parents had been protecting her from Linda's attempts at contact, but with the investigation making headlines, they knew she needed to hear the truth from family. We gathered at our house, Hannah, Mia, Grace, and their adoptive parents. The same kitchen table that had witnessed so many painful conversations now held space for healing. Grace sat between her sisters, 3 pairs of Linda's eyes in different faces, each carrying a piece of her story. "Does this mean I have to love her?" Grace asked, her voice small but steady. "No," Hannah answered, taking her sister's hand. "It means you get to choose who to love. And sometimes the best family is the one that helps you heal from the one you were born into." Today, our house has become a different kind of home. The walls that once held empty spaces now display a tapestry of chosen family: Hannah and her sisters at graduation ceremonies, holiday gatherings that span 3 adoptive families, quiet moments of connection forged in truth rather than manipulation. Linda continues to serve her sentence, her appeals falling on deaf ears as more victims come forward. Her last letter arrived yesterday, full of the same old promises and manipulations. Hannah didn't even open it. "Some stories don't need an ending," she said, feeding the envelope into the shredder. "Sometimes you just need to stop reading and start writing your own." The Breaking Patterns project has grown beyond anything we imagined. Hannah leads workshops for teenagers, helping them recognize signs of manipulation in their own families. Mia's studying law, determined to advocate for better protection of adopted children. Grace, now 14, runs an art therapy group for younger kids affected by family fraud. Rachel and I have found our own path to healing. The trust we rebuilt is stronger for having been tested, our love deeper for having faced its limits. We still make pancakes every Saturday, but now our table often holds 3 generations of survivors: birth families, adoptive families, and chosen families, all learning to write new stories together. Last week, Hannah spoke at a conference about family trauma and healing. She ended her speech with words that continue to echo: "Blood might tell you where you came from, but love tells you where you're going." And sometimes the longest journey isn't finding your real family. It's becoming real enough to be the family someone else needs. Linda's legacy lives on, but not in the way she intended. Instead of a network of victims, she created a web of survivors. People who learned to recognize manipulation, who chose truth over comfortable lies, who built something stronger than blood or guilt or obligation. Our story isn't finished. Each day brings new challenges, new families seeking help, new opportunities to choose love over fear. But now we face them together, stronger for having been broken, wiser for having been fooled, more compassionate for having walked through darkness and found our way back to light. Emma says we should write a book about it all. Maybe someday we will. But for now, we're too busy living, making pancakes, building trust, and proving that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that had to fight to find each other. And every time I see Hannah with her sisters, every time I watch Rachel welcome another struggling family into our home, every time I witness the quiet strength of people choosing to break patterns and build something new, I remember that morning in the kitchen when everything seemed to be falling apart. I realize now that some things have to break before they can become whole. Some families have to face their deepest fears before they can find their truest strength. And sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't holding on. It's letting go of who you thought you had to become who you were always meant to be. The pancakes still burn sometimes. We're not perfect, after all. But now those burnt edges remind us that even flawed things can be precious when they're made with love. And that's a lesson worth every scar, every tear, and every empty space we had to fill to learn it. The truth about Linda's other children emerged like pieces of a dark puzzle. Mia had been given up for adoption in Seattle, born during Linda's brief stint as a pharmaceutical sales rep, a job that had given her access to prescription pads and connections she'd later exploit. Her adoptive parents, both doctors, had been told Linda was a medical student forced to give up her child due to terminal illness. Then there was Grace, surrendered in Chicago 3 years later. Her adoption had been arranged through a church organization Linda had infiltrated, using their trust to run a side scheme targeting religious families. Grace's adoptive mother, a pastor's wife, had spent years praying for Linda's soul without knowing the full scope of her deception. The third sibling, Marcus, was the hardest to find. Born during Linda's first prison sentence, he'd been adopted through a private arrangement that Linda orchestrated from behind bars, using another inmate's family as intermediaries. Now 16, he lived in Boston with adoptive parents who'd been promised their adoption would remain closed forever, until Linda started sending him letters too. Each sibling's story revealed another layer of Linda's manipulation. She hadn't just abandoned her children. She positioned them like chess pieces, keeping them separate but available, each adoption crafted to provide her with different types of leverage and access to various communities she could exploit. The Breaking Patterns project grew from these revelations. What started as a support group in our living room evolved into a comprehensive program operating in 3 states. Emma's financial expertise proved crucial in tracking Linda's money trails, revealing how she'd used adoption agencies and church groups as unwitting fronts for her schemes. We established 3 main initiatives. The prevention program, led by Rachel, focused on educating adoption agencies and family services about manipulation tactics. She developed a red flag system that helped identify potential fraud before families were victimized, using patterns we discovered in Linda's cases. The recovery network, which I coordinated, provided immediate support for families discovering they'd been manipulated. We offered emergency housing, legal referrals, and trauma-informed counseling. The network grew to include former victims who'd become advocates, each bringing their own expertise and understanding. The Youth Alliance, Hannah's project, created safe spaces for children and teenagers affected by family fraud. She understood better than anyone how manipulation could distort a child's sense of identity and trust. The Alliance offered peer support, art therapy, and educational programs about healthy family relationships. The impact on other families revealed stories we never expected. There was the church group in Denver, where Linda had posed as a reformed addict seeking to help other mothers, ultimately scamming them out of their building fund. The domestic violence shelter in Portland, where she'd infiltrated support groups, targeting women at their most vulnerable. Each case connected to others, forming a web of manipulation that spanned decades. But healing emerged in unexpected ways. The Denver church group transformed their experience into a ministry for fraud survivors. The Portland shelter developed new screening protocols that helped protect other vulnerable families. Each victim who stepped forward strengthened our network, turning their pain into protection for others. Marcus's adoptive parents, initially hesitant to get involved, became key allies in developing protocols for protecting adopted children's privacy while still allowing them to connect with siblings. Their legal background helped us draft guidelines that several states now use in handling cases of adoption fraud. Grace's artistic talents sparked a new dimension in our work. Her therapy groups used art to help younger children process their experiences. The walls of our community center now display powerful pieces that tell stories of survival and reconstruction. Families rebuilt from broken pieces, stronger for having been shattered. Mia's medical background, inherited from her adoptive parents, brought another layer to our understanding. She helped document the health impacts of psychological manipulation, contributing to research that's changing how hospitals screen for family-based fraud. The ripple effects touched more lives than we could count. A judge in Florida cited our case studies in a landmark decision about adoption fraud. A filmmaker documented our story, spreading awareness to audiences we couldn't reach directly. Social work programs began incorporating our materials into their curriculum. Rachel's transformation proved especially powerful for other parents who'd been manipulated. Her willingness to share how she'd nearly been drawn into Linda's schemes helped others forgive themselves and focus on healing. The support group she started for parents became a model for similar programs nationwide. Emma's financial literacy workshops evolved into a comprehensive program teaching families how to protect themselves from emotional manipulation in financial decisions. The heart and wallet connect in ways we don't always recognize, she'd say, helping others understand how emotional vulnerability could lead to financial exploitation. Linda's former cellmate, Alice, became an unexpected ally. Her testimony revealed how Linda had built her network within the prison system, using other inmates' families as unwitting accomplices. Alice now works with our prison outreach program, helping identify and prevent similar schemes from taking root. The most profound changes happened in quiet moments. Like when Marcus finally met his sisters, their reunion happening in our backyard during a summer barbecue. 3 teenagers with Linda's eyes but their own distinct spirits, sharing stories and discovering connections that went deeper than DNA. Or the day Grace's art therapy group hosted an exhibition, and one of her young students, a 7-year-old affected by a similar scheme, presented her with a painting titled, My Real Family, a colorful collection of figures representing everyone who'd helped her heal. Hannah's college application essay about her experience went viral online, reaching other children of manipulative parents who thought they were alone. Her words became a touchstone for others. Sometimes the strongest families are built from broken pieces, held together not by blood or obligation, but by the choice to help each other heal. The Breaking Patterns Project now operates in 7 states, with plans for national expansion. We've helped over 2,000 families recognize and escape manipulative situations. Each success story strengthens our resolve. Each setback teaches us new ways to help. Linda continues serving her sentence, but her power diminishes with each family we help, each pattern we break, each child who learns they don't have to carry their parents' sins. Her last attempt to contact her children came in the form of a lawsuit, claiming we turned them against her. The judge, familiar with our work, dismissed it without a hearing.